standing in the middle of a beautiful city called Melbourne, Australia. It's an ultra modern city with skyscrapers. It's a large city. It's a sports city. It loves its different tournaments and competitions. It's on the ocean, a gorgeous beach. But in the heart of the city, there can be no denying it. The center of this city is the Shrine of Remembrance, which is behind me. It was built to memorialize those Australians that fought in the First World War. Obviously, other wars were added. There's a pillar dedicated by Queen Elizabeth to the Second World War, those who had fallen, Korea and other battles as well. Australia and New Zealand, too, were an enormous part of the war effort, even though the war didn't come to their shores, much like Canada was an enormous part of the war effort, punching above our weight. As you know, Canada had a beach, Juno Beach, next to the UK and the US in the liberation of Normandy on D-Day. It's called a Shrine of Remembrance, and indeed it has a sacred feeling to it. It's dominant in the city. It's respected. I see even, I'm speaking to you, I'm recording this on a Sunday. There are groups filing in constantly to the Education Center, the Visitor Center. And I tell you all this because Australia is a beautiful cousin of Canada, similar in many ways. The reason I'm down here is because the head of our Australia Bureau, our friend Avi Yemini, had a book launch. And I've been here for 3 days. I was in Auckland, New Zealand. And then the next day I went to Wellington, the capital of New Zealand. And today I'm in Melbourne, where last night Avi had his sort of hometown book launch for his new semi-autobiographical manifesto called A Rebel from the Start. And I want to give you a report on how that book launch went, but more importantly, on the things I learned along the way. I had never been to New Zealand before, and although I was coming in personal solidarity with Avi, he's one of our best reporters, best campaigners. He really is a one-man army, as I've taken to calling him. I also wanted to see a little bit about what New Zealand was like, because like you, I'm sure, I've been fascinated by it. It's a political oddity sometimes. It's a small country, only about 5 million people. So frankly, the same size as the greater Toronto area. But in some ways, it's a laboratory of political ideas. There was a point in time when it was held up as the free market, low tax, low debt exemplar. In recent years, however, the prime minister, until she recently resigned, was Jacinda Ardern, who, when she was younger, was the president of the Socialist International Youth. She's a World Economic Forum delegate, just like Justin Trudeau, a globalist, a censor, a global warming extremist, a gun grabber, and all of these ideas she could impose on a country the size of a big city. And because of that, I fear that she was able to twist and transform that country more than she could, more than even Trudeau could in Canada, more than Rishi Sunak could in the UK, more than Joe Biden could in the United States. The sheer size of those other countries makes it more difficult to turn a ship, like a battleship can't turn on a dime like a little canoe can. And so I was interested to see what New Zealand in 2023 was like after Jacinda Ardern. Remember that she was one of the most vicious, I'll say, and authoritarian imposers of lockdowns. I'll never forget this statement she made at a press conference where she told the reporters and she told New Zealanders to ignore anything else that anyone had to say. The government of New Zealand would be their only source of truth. Here, listen to her own words as she said it.
New Zealand, that in the midst of what is a global issue, as you would expect, there are a number of rumours that circulate. I am present on social media, I see it myself. I cannot go around and individually dismiss every single rumour I see on social media, as tempted as I might be. So instead I want to send a clear message to the New Zealand public. We will share with you the most up-to-date information daily. You can trust us as a source of that information. You can also trust the Director General of Health and the Ministry of Health. For that information, do feel free to visit at any time to clarify any rumour you may hear, covid19.govt.nz. Otherwise, dismiss anything else. We will continue to be your single source of truth.
That's one of the most stunning things I've ever heard. It's akin to Justin Trudeau saying that the country he most admired was Communist Trudeau because of its basic dictatorship. Here's a flashback of that.
Of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say we need to go green as fast as we need to start investing in solar. I mean, there is a flexibility that I know Stephen Harper must dream about, of having a dictatorship that he could do everything he wanted, that I find quite interesting.
I mean, that's a stunning revelation into Trudeau's heart, and it explains a lot these days about why Trudeau will not have an independent investigation into CCP corruption of Canadian political institutions. But what Jacinda Ardern said was not just a momentary flash and insight into her thinking. It was a statement of her obvious and comprehensive policy. She believed and still believes that the only source of truth is government, as if they have some higher moral and scientific understanding of the world, and that you merely have an opinion, but they have the truth. That you may have a view, but it's misinformation. The only reliable information comes from the government. The most incredible thing about that statement by Jacinda Ardern was how accepted it was. There was not an uprising by the media, by other institutions saying, "What are you saying? You do not have a monopoly on truth. It's a dangerous thing." You would think that church leaders would speak out against it. You'd think that media leaders, you'd think law professors, lawyers, maybe even civil liberties groups, but no. And I'm afraid that that will be Jacinda Ardern's legacy, cracking down on freedom in New Zealand, and now with her position at Harvard and around the world to export the New Zealand model of censorship around the world. And that's one of the reasons I went to see how Avi's book launches in New Zealand would go. Because there's one more layer, and I alluded to it the other day. When Avi sought to go to New Zealand about a year or so ago to do journalism, to meet up with New Zealand critics of the lockdowns, he was banned by the government. It was actually a joint campaign against him between the left-wing media and the left-wing government to trump up reasons why Avi couldn't get in. He was legally blocked. Well, illegally blocked, as it turns out. We lawyered up, as we like to do at Rebel News, and they finally relented. So Avi thought it would be poetic, and I agree with them, to have that first book launch in New Zealand, the country that sought to ban him. By the way, this area of the Shrine of Remembrance, because of its central location, its wide boulevard, its large lawns, and its meaning that the people who died and who are remembered here fought for civil liberties. So this Shrine of Remembrance area was a common place for anti-lockdown protests in Australia. And it was also where riot police on horseback charged those peaceful, unarmed protesters, perhaps a template for Justin Trudeau to follow later on during his invocation of a form of martial law to crack down on the truckers. So we are standing on very interesting territory here. Anyways, back to New Zealand. We got into New Zealand. For me, it was a very long journey from our office in Toronto, and we got through with no problem. And you'll remember that Avi wore a shirt that he had made. Kia ora is a Maori greeting, and it's a welcoming greeting. And he wore a shirt that said Kia ora, North Korea. Here's what he looked like when he stepped off the plane, if you recall.
Kia ora, North Korea. I am finally here in Auckland, even though the Communist Party tried their very best to stop me with the cover of their state bought and paid for mainstream media. Thank you to the New Zealand Herald for promoting my book. For the rest of you that are sane, still left in this country, make sure to come on Friday night in Auckland or Saturday in Wellington. Rebelfromthestart.com. There are still some tickets left, I believe. Rebelfromthestart.com. I'd love to see you all there. The smell of victory.
That was pretty funny because, in a way, Jacinda Ardern was trying to turn New Zealand into a kind of hermit kingdom, banning free speech, banning outsiders with bad political ideas. And remember, that's why he was kept out. According to the internal records that Avi was able to get from the government, he was kept out because of that he would stimulate a debate, a public policy debate that the government didn't like. That is not what the men of the New Zealand army, or those in Australia for that matter, fought and died for. So we landed in Auckland. I got there a day early just to get over the jet lag. It was quite a long journey. And I want to show you where we met, because Avi Yemini, like the rest of us at Rebel News, he's a little bit spicy, a little bit controversial, as the left would say. Obviously, he's a peaceful debater, a man of ideas, but the left wants to deplatform him, wants to cancel him. You might recall that a few years ago that happened to me when I was launching my book, The Libranos. We had booked 2 theaters, one in Calgary, one in Edmonton, paid in advance, but an online mob threatened the movie theater owner, who canceled at the last minute. Here's a flashback to that. I know something about book launches being canceled by street thugs. Remember this?
We got ourselves a street protest here, folks. I'm not going to do to Rickshaw Dave what they've done to my car. No threats. No threats.
As you can tell, he's a majority. He's a huge majority. Right.
Rickshaw Dave, where's that? You might be wondering, Ezra, when do I get my book?
Remember when you assaulted me
The
down
answer
in the
is,
legislature?
we found another place around the corner that has agreed to let us in and for a book signing.
You guys want to say that? Only got one of them.
And we'll all go march there together, get out of the cold, and we'll sign the books.
Well, we thought that might happen, and to tell you the truth, that's one of the reasons I was coming, not just to show solidarity with my friend Avi in his book launch, which was a very important. And by the way, I really recommend the book. It's funny, it's revealing, it's passionate, and if you like Avi as much as I do, I think you'll get a kick out of the book. You can find it on our website, rebelfromthestart.com. Anyways, so I was coming to support Avi for his book, but I was also coming to see how New Zealand handled it, given that the government had banned him before for expressly political reasons. Well, Avi was smart, and he found an ally in New Zealand that wouldn't be easily pushed around. You might know that Rebel News often has events in the Greater Toronto area, which is sort of a woke place. But we have a friendship with Charles McVitie, the president of the Canada Christian College, and he's not pushed around by Antifa thugs, and he has refused to cancel our events at his facility, and we're very, very grateful to him. And it shows that he's a man of ideas and debate. Well, we found a similar location in Auckland. It was a large church, a largely Maori church. And for those of you who don't know, Maori is the name of the original people of New Zealand. They are often portrayed as warriors. You may know the Maori haka, which is a fierce dance of friendship, actually, and welcome. And there's many things that dance stands for. They have a very interesting Aboriginal culture, which we learned about. When we were in Auckland, we went to the large National Museum there. It was fascinating to learn. Maoris are an important part of New Zealand. And this Maori church, it's a Christian church of an evangelical variety, I'll say. It's called Destiny Church. And it is a positive church whose members are largely Maori. And the leader of this church, Brian Tamaki is his name, is no stranger to taking political stands himself. In fact, he's the leader of a party called the Freedoms New Zealand Party. In New Zealand, they have districts where people vote, but they also have sort of a system, I think it's called MMP, where you have, if any party gets 5% of the vote spread out in any way, they get seats to their parliament as well. So they have seats apportioned by district and seats apportioned by vote. So the thinking that Brian Tamaki has is that he can get maybe 5% of the vote across the country. He's an incredible man. He's a religious leader. There's not just one Destiny Church in Auckland. There's churches around New Zealand. He's also the leader of this political movement, and he's deeply involved with Maori men because Maori men are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system and in gangs. And he works to bring those men out of the darkness and into the light, to give them a Christian belief system, as opposed to, say, finding that community in a gang. And what's so fascinating is how he himself and his organization really provides a lot of the social services in that way to Maoris and others in New Zealand. It was an amazing man, a charismatic man. And I have to say, maybe I'm easily bowled over, but just being in his presence, I could see why he inspires so many New Zealanders, especially Maoris. The police and the prosecutors and the politicians hate him for the same reason that they cracked down in Canada on Christian pastors who defied them during the lockdown too. And just like Pastor James Coates and Pastor Arthur Pavlovsky and other pastors in Canada were arrested, they arrested this Maori church leader. And instead of standing up for him, the media party condemned him. Despite the fact that normally the media would be very sympathetic to a Maori leader. It reminds me of the treatment in Canada, where Tamara Leach, who is a Métis woman, normally a Métis woman in the world of public affairs would be treated with a great welcoming by the media, who would say, well, let's listen to our native elders and let's be respectful. They actually tried to deracinate Tamara Leach, to doubt the fact that she's Métis. In New Zealand, I think something similar happened. They tried to condemn Brian Tamaki because he wasn't the right kind of Maori. He wasn't reading the woke script that was preferred by the white PhDs at the university. It's interesting to me because the Destiny Church has been called a prosperity theology church, and you see this sometimes in U.S. evangelical churches, where the pastor doesn't say be a victim, the pastor doesn't say be on welfare, the pastor says raise yourself up, be prosperous. And it's an amazing counter narrative then to the left-wing woke narrative that would say to Indigenous peoples in New Zealand, in Australia, and in Canada, no, you're perpetual victims and you need handouts. He's a very interesting man, and I think we're going to do some journalism with him in the future. Anyways, back to my main story. It was in the Destiny Church in Auckland that we had our first event. And I want to show you this one tweet that Avi spotted, and he retweeted it. Look at this. An Antifa trans protester. You can see that by their name and their flags. A transgender Antifa activist lamenting on Twitter that they wouldn't be able to cancel Avi's book launch because it was at a Maori church led by no one less than Brian Tamaki, who wouldn't bend the knee to the government. So obviously he's not going to bend the knee to some woke thugs.